Welcome to my channel. My name is Nikki, and today I'm going to read to you from Prince's Odyssey, On and Off the Record, This Thing Called Life by Neal Karlen. I'm going to read to you from chapter 1. Memoirs of an Amnesiac. Uptown, Set Your Mind Free. Uptown 1980 by Prince. Winter 2019. Another book about Prince? Asked a friend of a friend in Sebastian Joe's, my local uptown Minneapolis coffee shop, after I answered his query about what I was working on. Yep, another book about Prince. Prince, the universally acclaimed genius deemed worthy of genuflecting toward even by other acknowledged global geniuses. Prince, the personification of hip, to whom other intergalactic hipsters often offered unashamed gush. Prince, the international culture icon, who defied and crossbred genres from fashion to funk to apparent Three Stooges lunacy, and whose death made the Eiffel Tower the cover of the New Yorker, the front page above the fold headline picture of the New York Times, and all downtown Minneapolis glow purple. Yes, I said, another book about him. Prince at that point been gone for more than 2 years. A pretty compelling biography of his post-mortem life could probably already have been written about all that had happened to his name in his name since his demise. Why, my coffee shop interlocutor went on, honestly, genuinely, curiously, do we need another book about Prince? I mean, sorry, but why? And took no offense. That, I told him, is a very good question. I glumly gathered my papers and notebooks, stowed my laptop in my backpack, and slowly, haphazardly, ambled with my head down 6 blocks home to my apartment in Uptown, which Prince had made famous long ago with a joyful, eponymous ode to that Minneapolis neighborhood. I got to my apartment and turned on the lights. It was the middle of the afternoon, but I felt spooked into a morbid darkness. I then got in the shower to start the day over, felt the hot spray splatter my face, stared at the ceiling, and burst into tears. What? I shouted toward the ceiling. Do you want me to say? I was talking to Prince 78 days before a finished manuscript of this book was due, and I'd finally cracked. Thank God I didn't hear an answer. Instead of voices or a vision, the obvious response came to me in a memory on purple stationery inside a purple envelope on which Prince had written it in a childlike scrawl, Neal. It was the first letter he'd ever written to me. I'd put it in a $3.99 Target frame after he died. It had hung for 2 years above my desk, easy to see but hiding, the way Prince used to do himself, in plain sight. After my first interview and story about Prince came out in the Rolling Stone, he'd written me a note, which, unlike the third grader's handwriting of my name on the envelope, was filled with the florid ink flourishes of the charmingly affected penmanship he'd been practicing since junior high. Thanks for telling the truth, he'd written. Love, God, Prince. It was the first thank you note I'd ever received from anyone I'd written about. It was the only note I've ever received thanking me for telling the truth. I never expected one. It's kind of sort of the gig. And there was my answer. Thanks for telling the truth. That I can do. This is a work of nonfiction. That's a grandiose claim, to be sure, considering I am purportedly presenting a historically sound and journalistically accurate accounting of Prince, who ranks among the most seemingly unknown and unknowable people of our time. Prince, this genius, clown, god, demon, riddle, joke, teller of immutable truths, purveyor of temporal lies, and everything in between. I also want to make clear this is not a work of creative nonfiction, a genre of writing I have taught here and there in assorted MFA and journalism programs. I lack the moxie to claim that what follows is creative. If this book is remembered at all, I'd much rather it be for its accuracy than its creativity. This book is also not mesmero style nonfiction. It pains me to slur the name of Milton Mesro, author of the 1947 classic jazz memoir, Really the Blues. A wonderful tale of an astonishing jazz figure. So swell, I read are Mez's memoirs that in 2016, New York Review Books reissued Really the Blues, complete with a Tony introduction by New York Times music critic Ben Ratliff. Most memoirs insert a complicated relationship with the truth, Ratliff wrote, especially when they are not household names, and when the key events they describe are not a matter of public record. The most dubious assertions here include that Mesmero had a role in the invention of the term jam session, and that he was directly responsible for the popularity of Louis Armstrong in Harlem, but the reader probably expects some rearrangement of the verifiable truth. It doesn't especially blacken the brilliance of Really the Blues when one quickly just senses that Mez is blowing a fair gale of bullshit. After all, he was Mesro. Finally, I'm also not writing a clip job of my own previous scribblings on Prince, which I guess would be easy enough to do, but how sad. A clip job is a book or story with stories or anecdotes wholly lifted from other publications. When I quote from Rolling Stone, I say so. Among other things, it means the quote was fact-checked. Once upon a time, Rolling Stone had the best fact-checking department in the business, but that's another story. And frankly, I'm not good enough at a writer to want to swipe my own stuff from 30 years ago when I was even worse. For real. That's how we roll in Minneapolis. We begin by apologizing. Perhaps I sound as if I protest too much, but when it comes to Prince and the truth and the connection between the two, I don't think it is possible to protest too much. The contradictions elucidated by too many credible sources are just too mighty. Too many trustworthy sources. He was simply unable to tap into anything emotional. Over the years, Alan Leeds served Prince in virtually every critical executive role imaginable, not to mention duties as one of his few trusted confidants. In 2017's When Doves Cry, a curious biopic documentary, Leeds movingly, humanly described Prince's inability to simply discuss feelings without sounding obnoxious. I remember when Kim Basinger had been his significant other for a while, living in Minneapolis and holding an office at Paisley Park, he remembered, and that relationship, for whatever reason, ended abruptly. And he came into my office and just sat on my desk, Leeds continued, and I said, "Hey man, you okay?" According to Leeds, Prince veritably spat out the words with over macho venom, "How do you think I'd be?" and walked out. He wasn't, Leeds said, okay with compassion. What I said was intended as, "Do you want a hug? You know, a brotherly, you okay, dude?" And the only thing I could get back was a very snide, "How do you think I'd be?" Alternatively, there was a take of Andre Simone, the loudest echo from his past, who reached a rapprochement with Prince in the last year of his life. If you were close, Prince wanted to talk, he said. But Alan Leeds, whom he'd blown off, had been close. It was good for me because I never did find too many people I could relate to on a lot of different levels, Andre continued. And Prince was one of the few people throughout my life I could relate to. He was one of the few people throughout my life that I could connect with. He could talk from the heart, discuss life and death in the middle of the night, but he could also vent from the spleen, spewing comments to those who only meant to express concern about his well being. He had myriad levels of relationships over the years, so contradictory that it seems impossible that all those facets could be held in one personality. I don't think it hurt that I wasn't on his payroll, kept my distance, and never wanted anything except to do what needed to be done so I'd never have to write about him again or talk about a friendship I was never sure I had in the first place. And yet here I am writing a book contradicting myself. Yet in many ways, contradictions were the very essence of Prince. Yes, he was astonishingly unknowing, yet also shockingly wise. He was cruel and he was kind. And I know what I know. Taking stock of the eruption of paper in my living room, I paused looking at the 3 faded and cracked pieces of luggage along, ready for the glue factory. They had looked so shiny and bound for glory, sitting there in the Columbus Avenue store window on Manhattan's Upper West Side when I lived only a block away and a planet away from the Neapolis. Now the baggage was tattered with age, over, and misuse. Its once efficient packing compartments overflowing with thousands of sheets of paper. There were transcripts of several formal days, long questioning of Prince for a half dozen interviews, sometimes bound for publication, sometimes not. Reporters' notebooks spilled out of the battered suitcases, organized, sorted, and resorted so many times over the past 2 years that I had no idea if there was an order there or not. Perhaps Prince's story was all there in my living room, somewhere. Perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps there was no Prince story or a tidy narrative to explain what had been. Poking out from other baggage were other interview transcripts, printed on a 1986 dot matrix printer, stained with the coffee I'd been drinking when I first looked over the interviews I'd recorded back when with, who can remember? I looked at the pages. Ah, yes, 3 skill pages of interviews with the Revolution's Lisa Coleman and Wendy Melvoin for a Rolling Stone cover story in 1986, 33 years before. Under those were the quotes I'd scribbled down on index cards during my last conversation with Prince, 3.5 weeks before he died on April 21st, 2016. The baggage held hundreds and hundreds of those index cards, each with a date, a note, a quote, a half-thought, or a full paragraph scribbled on it. Many of them barely decipherable, taken down while on the phone in the middle of the night. Many I knew made no sense at all, even when I could make out the words. There were great wads of toilet paper spilling out of one of the suitcases. Over a quarter century before, I'd taken secret notes on the tissue, hiding from Prince and pretending I had to pee in the cavernous hotel bathrooms of whatever grand hotel suite in Paris or converted castle in Switzerland he was staying in as he conquered Europe on his 1990 nude tour. I'd been tagging along for weeks, conducting an interview for Rolling Stone. Except Prince told me 5 seconds before our interview began. I couldn't record or take notes of our conversations. I knew he was fucking with me, but it wasn't funny. This isn't funny. That tour was the last time I'd published a word he said until he died 31 years later. Under the toilet paper and the baggage were more notes, these scribbled days, months or years after the fact. Here was the time, memorialized on our 4x6-inch index card, when Prince brought to my attention the curious coincidence that we'd met as preteens. That would have been the late 1960s. We'd both been on the fringes of groups that hung out in the Dairy Queen parking lot on Plymouth Avenue, the main boulevard of Minneapolis, mostly Black North Side. One door down from my immigrant parents' Oliver Avenue shack. My behind my back nickname was Casper. Prince told me in his laugh sneer I had noted on one card. Paper quotes, notes taken in real time, a treasure trove of the being and nothingness, the in-betweens, the contradictions of Prince's life. And then there were the tapes of Prince and me talking dating back to 1985. I hadn't listened to them since transcribing the first cassette some 30 years before. I tried to listen for almost a year after he died, but I couldn't stand hearing the ghosts, not just his, but mine as well. I felt haunted hearing the past me, how everything will work out fine optimism. And why not? Especially on those first tapes. I was just 26. Prince was 27, and both of us were in love for what we were sure was the first and last time. Then there was a floppy disk with a rock opera we'd collaborated on, which he liked, produced, and which got the worst reviews of anything he ever did. The fact I am perversely proud of. Underneath that were typewritten, never used liner notes for a greatest hits collection. He'd hated my liner notes, my mid-career summation of his career, and the collection came out annotated by the wise Alan Leeds, a highly reliable narrator who has served as everything from James Brown's road manager to president of Paisley Park Records, and then spilling out of the large shoulder bag that was hip at roughly the same time as Don Johnson jackets were the notes that held our private conversations. Conducted for nobody, neither one nor off the record. Talks that went on until the last weeks of his life. What had come from those discussions were the hundreds upon hundreds of manuscript pages, of which I'd been typing 14 hours a day for most of the past 2 years. Every memory, story, quote, inflection of his, reflection of mine, plus everything I'd ever been told about Prince by someone I trusted. What a fucking mess, I thought. The papers literally flowing out of the sad sack luggage reminded me of a molten lava of facts and acts and quotes and articles signifying the great artist who almost escaped history. Except I wouldn't let him, and I won't let him. We always exacted playful, if spiteful, revenge upon each other for wrongdoings, and this was no exception. The only not and terrible thing about knowing Prince in the end was simply knowing Prince. That part was fun. Having shitty, personal, untrue things written about you in your hometown paper since you were 26 wasn't so fun. I knew from personal experience, stemming directly from being granted direct journalistic access to Prince. So I'll have my revenge on the purple guy for subjecting me to slurs simply for him giving me the honor of quoting him directly. Prince will not be allowed to run away from history as he planned. And besides, it's what he really wanted, I think. Thanks for telling the truth. I remembered again. I took a nap.